The Port of Barcelona gangway collapse. On August 11, 2015, at the Port of Barcelona in Spain, hundreds of passengers from a luxury cruise ship were disembarking for a day tour. It was a perfect summer morning, calm sea, clear sky. Nothing unusual. A temporary aluminum gangway was set up between the ship and the terminal, a standard procedure, done thousands of times around the world. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe so you never miss videos about the darkest and most shocking real-life disasters. Among the passengers was a mix of families, retirees, and tourists excited to explore Barcelona. People stepped onto the gangway, one after another. But something was wrong. The gangway wasn't properly secured to the port structure. It had shifted slightly every time someone stepped on it. At around 9:25 a.m., as a group of passengers were crossing, the gangway suddenly buckled. The metal joints snapped. Dozens of people were thrown downward as the entire structure collapsed with a loud crack. Some fell nearly 30 feet onto the concrete dock below. Others were trapped under twisted metal. Emergency crews rushed in. Helicopters landed, but the injuries were severe. What was supposed to be a routine disembarkation became one of the worst port-side accidents in Europe, leaving passengers critically injured and raising serious questions about port safety procedures worldwide. The Venice water taxi collision. On September 13, 2013, Venice, one of the most iconic cruise destinations on Earth, witnessed a devastating collision near the busy San Marco Basin. A massive cruise ship was maneuvering through the lagoon, assisted by tugboats. At the same time, several small water taxis carrying tourists were navigating nearby. In the chaos of Venetian traffic, one water taxi drifted too close to the cruise ship's path. The ship's thrusters created a strong current, pulling the smaller boat toward its hull. The water taxi operator tried to reverse, but it was too late. The boat smashed into the side of the cruise ship, causing passengers to be thrown into the water. Among the injured was a German tourist who suffered fatal wounds. Others struggled in the turbulent water as rescuers scrambled to pull them out. The shockwave from the crash spread throughout Italy, sparking debates about whether giant cruise ships even belonged inside the fragile Venetian lagoon. The Port of Miami crane disaster. On February 15, 2017, at the Port of Miami, one of the busiest cruise ports in the world, a cargo crane collapsed near a cruise ship preparing for departure. Dock workers were moving containers near Cruise Terminal F routine operations. Nothing unusual. Nearby, passengers were boarding, excited for vacations to the Bahamas. Without warning, the crane began shaking. A loud metallic screech echoed across the port as its upper section snapped. The entire structure toppled over, slamming onto the dock, crushing equipment, and sending workers running in all directions. Pieces of metal flew like shrapnel. One worker was trapped underneath. Several others were injured by falling debris. Passengers watched from the decks in horror as firefighters and paramedics swarmed the scene. The accident didn't strike the cruise ship itself, but it came terrifyingly close. A chilling reminder that passengers are vulnerable even before they leave the port. The St. Thomas Port Stampede accident. On December 23, 2010, in the Caribbean port of St. Thomas, thousands of passengers from multiple cruise ships were arriving for last-minute holiday shopping. The dock area was overwhelmed. Street vendors, taxis, and tour buses filled every corner. People were rushing, pushing, trying to get through narrow walkways. Then chaos erupted. A loud crash echoed through the port. A large vehicle had accidentally rolled backward, striking a group of tourists. Panic spread instantly. People screamed and began running in every direction. In the chaos, several passengers were trampled. Some fell onto the pavement and were crushed under the weight of the fleeing crowd. Security struggled to regain control. Paramedics rushed the injured to the hospital. What began as a festive day turned into a disaster caused by panic, overcrowding, and lack of emergency control. The Sydney Wharf lifeboat drop on February 25, 2018, at the White Bay Cruise Terminal in Sydney, a lifeboat drill turned into a deadly accident. Passengers had already disembarked. Crew members began routine safety checks, lowering a lifeboat into the water, something done daily across the world. But as the lifeboat reached halfway down the side of the ship, a mechanical hook snapped. The lifeboat broke loose and plunged straight down, slamming into the water with brutal force. Two crew members inside were thrown violently against the interior. Another was ejected and struck the side of the ship before hitting the water. Emergency boats raced in. Divers jumped into the harbor, but the impact had been catastrophic. Two crew members died instantly. It was a chilling reminder that even trained professionals face deadly risks in what should be basic safety procedures. The Bahamas pier collapse. On June 20th, 2022, a cruise ship docked at a private island in the Bahamas. Hundreds of passengers stepped onto a floating pier to reach the beach. The weather was perfect. Music played. Families took photos. Nothing seemed dangerous. But the floating pier was overloaded. Too many people were standing in the center. The structure began to tilt. Within seconds, a large section gave way, and dozens of tourists fell into the water. Some struck the metal supports. Others were pulled under by the sudden collapse. Lifeguards and crew members rushed in, pulling people to safety. Several passengers were hospitalized. The accident led to major redesigns of floating piers on private cruise islands. But for many travelers, the trauma never faded. The Durban port truck impact. On October 12, 2016, in Durban, South Africa, passengers were returning to their cruise ship after a shore excursion. The walkway between the terminal and the ship crossed a busy cargo zone. Normally, trucks were restricted during passenger movements. But that day, miscommunication changed everything. A large transport truck moved through the area just as passengers were crossing. The driver didn't see them. The passengers didn't see the truck. The collision was unavoidable. Several tourists were struck, thrown onto the pavement, and critically injured. Witnesses described the sound as like metal hitting bone. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the damage was done. The port faced massive criticism for failing to separate cruise operations from cargo traffic, a mistake that cost lives.